All we need is a place to be and a few good friends for some company. If you'd like to stay, you don't have to leave. We'll leave the lights on and the door unlocked. If you drop on by, you don't have to knock. We're happy to share whatever we've got.
Hi, I'm Clay, and this is Yarn About You, a podcast where I get to chat with people I know and love, as well as people I'd just like to meet and hear their story. Yarn About You would like to pay respect to the traditional owners of the land in which this podcast is recorded, the Darkinjung people, and acknowledge the elders, past, present and emerging, for their contribution and wealth of knowledge that they pass on from generation to generation. Today's guest is Rick Ireland. Rick is a man of many talents. He's a creative, an actor, an MC, an educator, a counsellor and more. He reached out to me years ago to try and connect a close friend of his with a close friend of mine. Rick's friend was the late, great Maxine Clippingaitis, who ended up becoming a great friend of mine as a result. On a trip to Melbourne a few years ago, I was lucky enough to sit down and record episode 4 of Yarn About You with Maxine, which was so special at the time, but is now absolutely priceless, because we lost Maxine last year in April 2023. Rick lives in Queensland, and when I saw him posting pictures of local beaches near me here on the New South Wales Central Coast a few weeks ago, I reached out and invited him to join me on an episode of Yarn About You so we could hear his story. I'm very proud to call Rick my friend, and I hope you enjoy our yarn. Rick Ireland, welcome to Yarn About You.
Thank you, Clay.
I'm so happy to finally meet you after all these years, and it just seemed right to do it today.
Great to meet you too, and I love your podcast and really looking forward to it.
Now, I always start going right back to the beginning. Tell me about your parents.
Okay, so my parents, Daphne Margaret Ireland and William Arthur Ireland, were two very loving parents, two very beautiful people, loved by many people in our local community. My dad worked in a convenience store owned by his sister Claire. Claire's Corner was the name of the store.
Whereabouts is that?
In Toowoomba. So I was born in Toowoomba, Queensland, which is a town west of Brisbane. And so my Auntie Claire owned Claire's Corner. My grandparents owned a bakery on the diagonal corner called Ireland's Bakery way before I was born, because when I was born, my dad was 44 and my mum was 17 years younger than Dad. So, yeah, so on Dad's side of the family, there were, small businesses being operated by, grandparents and my Aunt Claire. And my father was into horse racing, and sometimes that wasn't such a good thing because there was money lost. However, Mum and Dad had quite a loving relationship up until they didn't, and then they separated when I was maybe 12 or 13. Mum was a very loving person who also had a love for horses in her early life. She lived around Sandgate in Brisbane area. And she would often go to the local stables at Sandgate, and I think she did, I'm not sure exactly what she did with the horses, but she would help out at the stables. So she always had a love of horses, and of course Dad's love for horses was somewhat different. Mum never really bet on the horses herself, but they were both really loving people. My mother had the kindest heart, and she would literally give you the shirt off her back if you needed it. She was that kind of person. But unfortunately, like all human beings, they had their own histories and their own woundedness, and often that, at times in my adolescence played out, in ways that were somewhat traumatic for me and my brothers and sisters. However, I loved my parents so dearly, and if I had my time all over again, I would not want any other parents, because they really loved us. Even though at times perhaps they didn't love themselves to the degree that they could have. And yet that's humanity, really. I think I'm exactly the same. I think that I believe I'm a good person, and yet there are times when my woundedness would get in the way of, peace of mind and serenity and relationships.
Mhm.
So, but yeah, I really loved my parents and I'm really grateful for everything they did for us. My mother was a wonderful cook. We always had lots of food to eat, even if the family was struggling financially. There was always food on the table. We always had brand new school uniforms, which was amazing when I think about some of their financial struggles back in the day, thinking about some kids at my primary school whose families just could not afford new shoes or school uniforms. So, we never missed out on anything. So, yeah, I think I'll stop there.
And you spoke about your siblings. Whereabouts are you in the ranking of siblings?
So I'm in the middle.
I'm a middle child too.
Oh, right. Well, actually, I guess I am in the middle because years later I found out that I had a half-sister who was adopted. She was my mother's first child. Back in the day, I think Mum was about 19 and it was that time of life, that time in the world where young women getting pregnant was so frowned upon and so judged. It was all, you don't tell anybody. So when Mum fell pregnant, she was so happy to look. She was looking forward to having her baby. However, her father, they were living in Sandgate, and her father said to her, if you dare bring a child back into this house, you're not going to have a home to come back to. So the outcome of all of that was my mum had to give her first daughter away for adoption after Mum had actually breastfed a child, which normally would not happen with a baby that was about to be adopted out. But so Mum had kind of bonded, in that way with her daughter. And Mum had, I guess a year or two before Mum died from lung cancer in 2000, Mum had tried to look for her daughter with the help of my oldest sister, the second eldest, but to no avail. And the reason being that at that time, my oldest sister's parents who adopted her did not want her looking for her maternal, blood mother, however you say it. And so that never happened. But as soon as Heather's parents died, Heather and her daughter tried looking for Mum, by which time Mum had died, and they found us. And I flew over to Scotland the very next year and met her.
Wow.
And then she flew over to Australia to meet my other three sisters. So I have two younger sisters who are twins, and, well, one of whom has died. And I have my oldest sister, who I always knew as my oldest sister before we found out about Heather. And my oldest sister has also died. Within like 3 years of each other, we lost two of our siblings. And yeah, so I guess, am I still in the middle if I have two older sisters?
Absolutely.
And then there's me, and then there's Kim and Karen, and now Karen. So Karen and Jade, aka Lynette. Kim and Jade, aka Lynette, have both died. Kim, my younger sister, died from stage 4 brain cancer, glioblastoma, in 2021. And my older sister, Jade, died in 2019 from liver cancer. So yeah, it was a really, really big time for us all, and particularly for my beautiful sisters,
It's such a shock when anything happens within the family. You're always scared that things are going to happen, and then one day when it actually does, I don't think you're ever prepared, no matter what happens.
Yeah, and also with, Kim, my younger sister who died from glioblastoma brain cancer, she was given, approximately 2 years is usually the average time that people may survive with glioblastoma, but she lasted over 3 years. So, she did really, and she was absolutely, as was my older sister Jade, they were both absolutely inspiring in terms of their courage and the way that they handled their diagnosis and the courage that they actually lived. It just exuded out of every pore of their body, mind and spirit, the courage to just, tie up any loose ends and to just live one day at a time with knowing that their time was was nigh, you know. Yeah, so, you know, life on life's terms, huh?
That's for sure.
None of us know when our time is up.
So you grew up in Toowoomba?
I did.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I grew up in Toowoomba, and as a little boy, I loved visiting my neighbours. I was a very happy kid, and then I played judo as a young boy. I played judo for a couple of years. My older sister Jade, she was very good at judo. She was in competitions and all that kind of things, but I quite enjoyed judo. I didn't enjoy football. Dad wanted me to play football, which I did, but I didn't enjoy that nearly as much. And then I discovered drama when I was maybe 12 years of age. I joined the Toowoomba Police Citizens Youth Club drama group. And the lady who was running the classes said to me, "You're very good at this." She said, "Have you ever thought of joining the local repertory theatre?" And I said, "Well, no." And she said, "I think you should," which I did. So I joined the local repertory theatre and started doing plays with them. I think the first one was A Christmas Carol, and followed by A Scent of Flowers and various other plays up until the age of 15 and a half or thereabouts. But also during that time, the Queensland Theatre Company came to Toowoomba to audition kids from all over the Darling Downs area, which included Toowoomba, because they had a project in mind that was going to bring people like me together to work on a full-scale production, which was not only going to include the acting team and the design team and the writing team, made up of young people like myself, but it was also going to include people from Queensland Theatre Company who were going to head each of these teams.
Oh, wow.
So we had a professional director, there was a professional costume designer heading the design team, there were also professional writers who got involved with the young people to write the script.
So it was like a mentoring program.
Oh, it was amazing. Yes, exactly. And so people from all around the area like Dalby, Warwick, Oakey, Stanthorpe and beyond, we all auditioned. And it was my Auntie Claire, who ran her business, Claire's Corner, that saw the ad in the paper. And she said, "Ricky, you know, maybe you could apply for this." And I did. I auditioned, and I remember singing "Try a Little Kindness" for part of my audition, which I love that song. It was a Jamie Redfern song back then, and I loved Jamie Redfern. And so anyway, and I had to do a little acting piece. I can't remember what I did, but I got on the acting team, and it was amazing. So for the next 2 years, I was involved in the Darling Downs Youth Theatre. The first year we did a play called Genesis, a rock musical. So there were lots of instruments, and it was the biblical kind of version of the story of Genesis with a difference.
Mm-hmm.
And then the following year we did Bottom's Electric Summertime Dream, which was a version of a Summertime's Dream, a
Midsummer Night's Dream.
Midsummer Night's Dream, thank you. So if you can imagine a 13-year-old young boy, 13 and 14 years of age, experiencing this amazing project and acting experience. And we actually rehearsed and performed in Toowoomba's Empire Theatre, which is a theatre that was originally a movie theatre way back, like in my dad's youth. He would go to see films. But it had lay dormant for years and was, you know, covered in pigeon poop, and we'd go in on the weekends and clean up the pigeon poop, and we'd clean up wherever we could to make it habitable for people to come and eventually enjoy our first production of Genesis.
Wow.
And then a Bottom's Electric Summertime Dream the year after that. So that, you know, from the age of like 12, 13, 14, 15, that was my introduction to theatre, which was amazing.
That sounds incredible. I used to travel across the country for work, different jobs. And the one thing I love about the small towns are the theatres.
And Clay, if you could see the Empire Theatres today, like the Toowoomba City Council came on board.
Oh, fantastic.
And spent a lot of money. It's an Art Deco theatre.
Oh,
so
wow.
Maybe Google it and take a look sometime.
Okay.
The Empire Theatre. And there's a fantastic, like we have artists coming in from all around Australia, sometimes overseas, performing plays. You and I were talking earlier about Rowena Wallace. She performed Rebecca on the Empire Theatre stage. And there's been so many other productions as well. So.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
No. So you were with the local theatre for a while.
So I was with the Toowoomba Repertory Theatre as a teenager, and then I moved to Melbourne. I wanted to become an actor. I wanted to, I'd spent my life watching shows like Number 96 and The Box and, just watching all these amazing shows. And I think they must have had some influence on my wanting to kind of do what they're doing. And at the same time, also my love of theatre too, which started as a teenager. But I didn't know anybody in Melbourne. So I was only 16. My mother did not want me to go to Melbourne. I'd left school. Couldn't handle school. I was a school dropout, as they say, at the age of 15. And I wasn't happy, and all I wanted to do was act. And all I wanted to do was get out of Toowoomba and experience some other kind of life. I'd been writing to an actress called Dinah Mann, who was a regular on Number 96 for a couple of years. And anyway, one day I phoned her and said, "Hey, Dinah, I'd really like to get out of Toowoomba and move to Melbourne. You're the only person I know. Would you consider putting me up for just a very short time? I promise I'll be out of your hair. I'll find a job." And anyway, Dinah said, "Look, let me talk to Jerry about it." That was her mother who she was living with at the time. I mean, Dinah was, 26 or 7 at the time, living with a beautiful mum, Jerry. And she got back to me and she said, "Sure, come on down." So I had saved enough money to kind of make the trip down and have a bit of money before I was working in a supermarket full time after I left school, and then moved to Brisbane and continued working with the same chain of supermarket. And then I caught the train to Melbourne. Dinah picked me up from the station. I mean, here was I, meeting my friend Dinah, who I'd written to as a fan for 2 years on a show that I absolutely adored. And she's just the most beautiful person. We have a lovely friendship to this day. Whenever we go to Melbourne, we catch up. And so, Dinah and Jerry put me up, and I found a job in a supermarket in Port Melbourne, like the next day or the day after, full-time job. And then I found somewhere to live about maybe 2 weeks or 3 weeks at the very most later. And in fact, it was Dinah who helped me to find an agent. Now, Dinah knew that I loved theatre and acting, but she didn't know if I was good at it. And so I remember her going upstairs and bringing down a script, something that I think she'd worked on in her career. I can't remember what the script was. It wasn't Number 96, I don't think. And anyway, we did a bit of a read together. And I think that was enough for her to then, suggest to me that I could join an agency. And it was actually the Barry Michael agency. And so I went to meet Barry, and he accepted me for his books. And I think within a week I was being an extra on the Sullivans, and then I got my first line on the Sullivans when Paul Cronin's character Dave Sullivan had become a captain or something, and I was this young kid in an alleyway in Camberwell, and Dave Sullivan walks proudly down the laneway in his captain's outfit, and my line was, "G'day, Captain." And so I think that was my first one line on the Sullivans. And then I ended up getting a few more lines in another episode of the Sullivans. And then I got Cop Shop. But before too long, I also got a role in a telly movie called Dead Man's Float. And if Jackie Gordon's listening, she's going to be going, ugh. Dead Man's Float was a children's telly movie that we filmed at Lawn, and the juvenile leads were myself, Greg Rowe, Sally Boyden, and Jackie Gordon. And also in the cast was Bill Hunter, Bunny Brooke, Ernie Sigley.
Wow.
And other people And so, and I had to have an American accent for that, right? So I did this audition with Tom Broadbridge, and before I knew it, I had gotten the role. Actually, Tom said to me, Rick, the reason you got this role, he said, is because of your enthusiasm to want to do it, So that was good enough for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
So then I jumped in a car one day with Bill Hunter, who had 12-pack of Victoria Bitter cans of beer sitting on his lap.
Everybody I know has a story drinking with Bill Hunter.
Right.
Always.
I never drank with Bill Hunter, but I remember Tom looking over and saying, "Hey, Bill, what's going on here?" And I remember Bill looking at Tom and saying, "Hey, Tom, have you ever known me to not do a good job?" And that was enough, for Tom Broadbridge to not say anymore. Yeah. So we made the trip out to Lorne, and it was the most fantastic experience. I think we only filmed for, 12 days or something. And the telly movie is probably not that great, but my mother loved it, and it was a terrific experience.
Those were the days when there was so much production being made here in Australia.
Yeah, the 80s, yeah?
Yeah, it was a great time. Really, really good, different, creative projects.
Do you mind me asking what your first job in television was?
My first job in telly, I did some commercials, but my first job in telly was in a show called Peter and Pompey. It was a telly movie for the ABC. There were a group of them made for the bicentennial, and that was with Kate McDonald, Lynette Curran, Emile Minty, Amanda Muggleton, Paul Chubb. Yeah, it was a really, really good cast, and Dennis Miller, who I worked with later on as well. But yeah, they were the days when there was always productions going on. Yeah, they were really good times in the 80s. I loved it.
That's fantastic. I mean, I was so grateful for Dinah's friendship and for her helping me, I don't know. I mean, maybe I would have gotten an agent anyway. I don't know, but I was just so incredibly grateful. It was just like, how blessed am I, to actually, I'll just tell you a little story. Before I met Dinah, Anya Selecki and Chad Haywood were two actors that worked on 96, and I started watching number 96 like a lot of people that, that I know, particularly, having joined the Facebook number 96 page, were watching number 96 at the age of 9, just as I was. I used to sneak into the lounge and watch it on the telly, and then eventually Mum called me out and said, "Come on, you can come and watch it with me." She knew that I could handle it. I was kind of watching it more out of the interest of the stories rather than, some nudity or whatever. But anyway, 1 year in Toowoomba, I think I was 14, Chad Haywood and Anya Selecki were special guests at the Toowoomba show. And I remember being so excited. And so I went to see them. They were doing, an appearance. And then I spent all my show money on a fake gold bracelet for Anya Selecki. And I had engraved, "Dear Anya, lots of love, Ricky, kiss, kiss," whatever. So then after the interviews, I went up to Anya and I was so smitten, she was so gorgeous, just a beautiful, aura about her. And I gave her the bracelet and she was obviously really chuffed, and she took my hand and she said, "Would you like to go for a little walk, around the pavilion?" And so we did. We went for a little walk around the pavilion, and then she took me into the caravan to meet Chad Haywood, who looked really unimpressed. And I've spoken to Chad about that in recent years. And he said, "Oh, I'm so sorry about that." I said, "God, not a worry. He's this young kid coming into his private space, in between gigs." But so I started to write to Anya and never heard back from her. And when Anya and I were walking around the pavilion, she had mentioned people that she really enjoyed working with, and Dinah Mann was one of them. And so when I hadn't heard from Anya, I wrote to Dinah and I said, "I haven't heard from Anya. Do you know how I could get a letter to her?" And Dinah said Anya had left the series. And of course, she was still on air, I think, at the time. And I wrote back to Dinah and said, "Thank you very much for letting me know, what's going on." And then Dinah wrote back and said, "No worries, how's life in Toowoomba," or whatever. And we just kept writing to each other, which is how we developed that pen pal friendship. So yeah, that's how all that happened.
What was your first paid gig? Sullivan's?
Yeah, that would have been, I think, my first paid gig. And then I went on to do occasional commercials. I remember doing a commercial for the electricity company of the time. I remember doing a TV commercial for epilepsy. Yeah, I remember doing a TV commercial for Aspro Clear. But my most favourite commercial was, by which time I'd actually moved from Barry Michael Agency to Stacey Testro Management. And Stacey had organised an audition for this television commercial to promote a product called StrongGuard, put out by Dettol, that you spray all over your rubbish bins to get rid of the germs and the pongs. And so I, did this audition, and then at the time, Myra de Groot was working with Stacey in the office, and it was a Saturday or a Sunday, and I get this call from Myra saying, "Hey, Rick, I didn't want to make you wait, but I just wanted to let you know that you've got the commercial." And I was really excited. And, within a week I was at Channel 7 studios in Melbourne, and they'd actually changed this particular area of the studio and converted it into a cobblestoned laneway, Melbourne laneway, with the backs of houses and including a chicken coop. And they had a sparkling brand new, what looked like a brand new garbage truck that would be part of the shoot, which would come down the street as four singing garbos were singing about this fantastic product called StrongGuard put out by Dettol. And we mimed it, actually. They'd organised professional singers to record the jingle, which we mimed at that time. But I think that was the only time in my career where I was recognised on the train by school kids. They'd always say, "Oh, there's the Garbo from the Garbo ad." Because other television work that I'd done over the years, it never brought any recognition, which is probably a great thing. I'm sure there's a lot of really famous actors out there that wished they weren't as recognised as they were. But so that was a really well-paid commercial, but that wasn't my first commercial. Oh, and in fact, that commercial ended up on Barry Humphrey's series called Flashback.
Oh, yeah.
Which is a great series. Yeah. So it goes through the 60s, 70s, 80s, I think, or maybe 90s. I can't remember. But that commercial is, and Barry introduces a commercial in a way where he says something like, "And just at a time in life where men were getting in touch with their feminine side," and you see me holding up this spray can of StrongGuard, looking very in touch with his feminine side. So my first paid gig was probably the Sullivans, and then I went on to make appearances in shows like Cop Shop and Neighbours and Home and Away. When I moved to Sydney, that was.
What era of Home and Away?
So I'm thinking 1991-ish.
Okay.
So I think it had only just started.
88 it started.
Did it?
Yeah.
Oh, right.
88, I think.
88? Yeah, I think maybe it was even 1990 I did Home and Away. And I just had a small role playing a workman who came into the school to do some work that I think was leading toward a new building being built. And they had to remove a tree in the playground, which the kids were all up in arms about. So they came and confronted me about it. And so, it was like what we call a 50-worder. And but I did Prisoner, Neighbours, Cop Shop, E Street. I appeared on that as well. But my main bread and butter back in the 80s was theatre and education. Mm-hmm. So I was contracted to, I think, at least 3 theatre companies in Melbourne at the time: Handspan Theatre, Arena Theatre. There was another theatre company called Out Theatre, which employed only LGBTQI actors and directors. And I remember being really thin about that at the time. And I, maybe there was a part of me then, definitely was a part of me then, that didn't want to be outed in that way. I was out, but I didn't want to be, known as a gay actor or whatever. But, when I look back at that version of myself, I think, wow, Rick, really? Get over it. But so I did a lot of travelling around country Victoria, New South Wales, Tasmania, performing in primary, secondary schools, performing over in the Adelaide Festival when I was with Arena Theatre and with Handspan, I think. Had the best opportunity, being employed full-time as an actor. It was just fantastic. And when I wasn't working as an actor, I worked in hospitality, and I was so fortunate because I ended up working at a place called the Chevron Hotel in Border Road in Melbourne, which back in the 80s was one of the most popular live band venues of its time. And we saw all of the best artists, Wendy and the Rockets, Marsha Hines, Russell Morris, you name it, people played there. And I also worked at a jazz club in South Melbourne, and it was the most amazing place to work. Yeah.
My sister is 6 years older than me, and she used to love going to concerts with her girlfriend. And when she was about 13 or 14, mum and dad said, right, you're only allowed to go if you take your brother with you. So I used to go to all the big concerts that have Lidcombe Oval or, at a showground somewhere where they'd have people like Midnight Oil, Cold Chisel, the All Nighters, Mondo Rock, like all these different bands would come on. They'd come on and do 3 or 4 songs and then somebody else would come on. Dragon, it was just a really good time.
That sounds amazing. All of those people you just mentioned played at the Chevron more than once.
Yeah, I'm sure, because they used to just travel around.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. They're starting to do it again now. I know Wendy Matthews is up here on the Central Coast regularly with groups of other people. Yeah, it's such a great way to be exposed to music.
It really was a special era, wasn't it? And I'm not sure how old you are. I'm 61.
I just turned 50.
Oh, wow, you're a baby. Okay.
I don't feel like it.
But I mean, I just look back at that era and think I'm so lucky that I was in Melbourne during the 80s. It was fantastic.
I always think of, the difference between bands or even celebrities now as to what they were back when I was growing up. I don't think you'll have icons anymore. When you look at people like you spoke about Rowena Wallace or, people who are on the front of all the magazines, they were famous. They couldn't go anywhere. They couldn't do anything. I don't know half the people that are on the cover of magazines these days. And if you do, you know everything about them. So there's no mystique. It's such a wonderful thing that we've got so many avenues. But I also find it really sad. We don't kind of hold people up like we used to.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Like, as you were sharing that, I was just thinking, I wonder if, for example, actors from Home and Away who may be on the front cover of, I think the TV Week is still in existence, isn't it? Magazines like that, which back in the 80s, if you're on the front cover of TV Week, like beautiful people like Paula Duncan and Linda Stoner and, Abigail and, just people from that era that were so well known and so loved. People like me really kind of in a way revered them. I wonder if that is still happening to a degree. You think not? Like in terms of people of my age back in the 80s now, do you think they would be revering the Home and Away actors as much as...
Unfortunately, I don't think that they do.
Yeah.
Even movie stars, there's so many interviews now and, TikTok and Facebook and stuff where people can get on there and be themselves and talk. Like I said before, there just isn't the mystique that there is. You think about superstars like Madonna. I don't know, maybe Beyonce is one of the last ones. You've got people like Taylor Swift, but even she's human, where people like Bowie, they were superhuman. They were just these icons that were just incredible. I kind of miss that. And I don't know whether it's just because I'm getting older that I'm seeing them differently or seeing people differently, but I don't think there's, the Hollywood legends like your Elvises or your, Cary Grants and all that anymore. Doesn't happen anymore.
Yes, and I was just thinking then too about, what it would have been like for my dad, who, if he was alive today, he'd be over 100. But when he was like in his teens and watching, the movie stars of his day and his generation, completely different now.
Well, when I did the first series of Clowning Around, we had an old American actor called Van Johnson who was in the show. And I was 17. I had no idea who he was. But I found out later that my mum's mum, my grandmother, adored him when he was in the movies in the 40s. And she passed away way before I was born. But, mum was saying, if only my mum knew that you'd be working with Van Johnson. And when I met him, he was lovely. He was such a lovely man. But, he was just another actor. I was working with Ernie Dingo. He was exciting.
Yeah.
But I wish now that I know a lot more, my 50-year-old self, knows about Van Johnson's career. And, he was friends with Angela Lansbury and Judy Garland and Elizabeth Taylor he did shows with. He was with MGM for years, Jimmy Durante, Jimmy Stewart, and the only person I asked him about was Barbara Eden because I loved her.
You and I both have that in common, don't
we?
We both have our pictures with
you've got
Barbara
your picture.
Eden.
That's right. And going full circle, there was one day when we were on the set with Van and he said, "You never asked me about anybody. How come you never asked me about anybody?" And I just kind of shrugged and said, "Oh, have you met Barbara Eden?" And he looked at me like I was crazy and he said, no, but when I go back, I'm going to find her and I'm going to tell her you said hello. And that was it. I was happy. I didn't care about it. He'd talk about, what did he say? He said, the Gabor sisters, they open their mouths more than they open their legs, and that's saying something. He'd say all these incredible things, and they didn't mean anything to me at the time, but I wish I'd written stuff down or had this medium. Imagine talking to that man now.
Oh.
But fast forward to 2018, Van's long gone, but Barbara Eden isn't, and she's in Homebush Bay and at some sort of Comic-Con or something like that. So I go along, I get my ticket, and I've got, 30 seconds to meet her, to get my photo taken. And I think about what I'm going to say, and finally I get to walk up to her and I look at her and she smiles at me and I say, I worked with Van Johnson years ago and he said he was going to go back to LA and he was going to find you and say hello. Did he say hello to you? She went, no, I never met Van. I said, I know. And we got the photo and I walked away. And so and I looked back and she was just looking at me like, what the hell was that?
What just happened?
But for me, I wrapped it up and it went back full circle.
That's awesome. That is so awesome. Like, isn't she beautiful? I mean, I remember having that 30 seconds to because there was such a huge lineup.
Yeah.
When I was a little teenager, I mean, I Dream of Jeannie. I just watched all the time. We'd come home from school, I Dream of Jeannie and Bewitched, King's Island. And
I was obsessed with Jeannie. Loved Jeannie.
Me too. Like I was Jeannie, in my bedroom.
In your bottle.
I would, my bedroom was my bottle. I would blink. I would, do the arms thing. And I had a mirror that I could swivel and I would shake my mirror sometimes. And I'd go, stop it, master. Stop it. As though master was shaking the bottle. And then I created my own magic. I'd blink from my bedroom. This is pretty crazy. I can't believe I'm admitting it, but I would blink from my bedroom. I'd close my eyes. I'd feel my way into the lounge room. And then I'd get into the lounge room, to the sound now. And then I'd suddenly be in another room.
Did you tell her about that?
No, there wasn't time.
No, there wasn't time.
But I did have a chat with her and met her husband when she was doing some signing on the longer table, whatever. Yeah. Just, some chit chat. But aren't we fortunate, hey, to have met her?
Really fortunate. I'm really happy. I'm really happy with the people that I've met and the time that I've had with people. But yeah, Barbara Eden was my ultimate. I was so excited. But have you ever noticed that back in the day, there seemed to be two shows of things like Bewitched and I Dream of Jeannie, like Francis the Talking Mule and Mr. Ed, like the Addams Family and the Munsters. There seemed to be two of the same kind of shows.
Yeah, I mean, I was certainly aware of that with Bewitched and I Dream of Jeannie. In fact, I think there was a little bit of
they were always rivals.
Yeah, course, yeah. But I hadn't thought about those other shows until now. That's interesting.
That's just sort of stuff I think of as an old man. In all the extra time that I have now.
Yeah. That's fantastic. What a great chat.
So, what was next in your career?
What was next?
Because how long were you in Melbourne?
So I was in Melbourne for 9 years, during which time I did all those shows, Prisoner, Cop Shop, Neighbours, Sullivan's, did all my theatre and education work with Handspan, Arena Theatre, Out Theatre. And then I decided that I wanted to live in Sydney. So I moved to Sydney and I lived there for 5 years.
So what prompted that move?
Well, it was kind of a bit of a geographical in a way, I suppose. I'm part of a 12-step program and we often refer to a geographical as being kind of running away from somewhere to go to somewhere else, but really not looking at the underlying issue that is needing to be solved wherever you are. It's not going to magically disappear. So I moved to Sydney and I knew, like I'd had a life like many people, I loved to drink when I drank. I wasn't a daily drinker, but when I drank, I often drank a lot. I can remember the worst hangovers ever. I was also, quite promiscuous. I was a young, according to some people, good-looking gay guy who, just kind of got lost in that whole culture of dance and drinking and
party,
being young, hey, just partying and all of that. But by the time I moved to Sydney, I just felt, I was getting older, I guess, and I just felt that something needed to change, and I wasn't sure what that might look like. But when I first arrived in Sydney, I was still, drinking and night clubbing, etc. And I remember picking up the Yellow Pages one day and thinking to myself, something needs to change. I need to change. How do I change? And so I remember picking up, and I thought, people have mentioned meditation as being a way to create change in one's life. And so I picked up the Yellow Pages and I, opened it up to M for meditation. And I literally closed my eyes and, circled my finger down to touch the page, and it landed on Raja Yoga meditation. And so I phoned them, and they were offering free meditation courses. So off I went to do this free meditation course. And I just loved it. Part of the Brahma Kumari's Raja Yoga organization and the meditation includes what is referred to as drishti, which is like an open eye meditation where we look at each other in the eye, and, the whole kind of namaste thing, I the soul, acknowledge the soul in you. It was a very beautiful experience for me, very, very touching. I really felt like I was meeting spiritual fellows back at that time, and it was very healing. And so I really got involved in Raja Yoga meditation back in the early 90s. I gave up drinking, I gave up sex, I gave up meat and, onion and garlic, God forbid.
Why would you give up garlic?
Well, apparently there was something to do with the toxicity of the garlic and the onion that could kind of counteract something within the body tied to, I don't know, I can't really remember. I think it was tied to being celibate or whatever. It could become a bit of a stimulant or something, maybe, if my memory serves me. But I was happy to go on the ride. And I just had no television for over 2 years.
Wow.
And I was getting up every morning at 4:30 and meditating for, half an hour, 45 minutes, going off to a morning class at 7:30 for an hour. And then coming back home, I lived above a deli in Oxford Street, Paddington. And I worked in the deli, and I lived above the deli and paid really, really affordable rent.
That wasn't the deli in number 96.
No.
No, different one? Okay, just checking.
You know that wasn't.
What?
Of course you do. But, that was one of the first things I did when I lived in Sydney, was go straight to
Moncur Street.
Moncur Street in Wallara and check out the number 96 building. So, and that was directly opposite Paddington Markets where I lived. So I was meditating, and during which time I went to India. And Stacey Testro had moved to Sydney and opened up an office. But I'd met this other agent through a friend of mine and, regretfully moved from Stacey over to June Evans' agency. No offense to June Evans' agency, but I don't know why I left Stacey, but I did. But I did work. I did that Home and Away episode. I did.
That's another thing we've got in common, by the way. I was with June Evans for a while.
Oh, were you?
Yeah. Yeah, when I was with Johnny Young Talent School, and June Evans was there. So
did you know a guy called Jerry? Anyway, Jerry worked for June, and he was the friend or the cousin of a friend of mine, and that's how I came to move from Stacey to June. But I didn't really get a lot of work, but I did end up being contracted to another theatre and education company for nearly a year, during which time we did a tour of Tasmania for a month and toured all over New South Wales, performing in schools, doing a play called Flowers for Algernon, which was a really lovely experience.
Wow.
So I came back from India, and I ended up being diagnosed with HIV, funnily enough, around that time.
So what year was that?
That was around 91-ish, which really came as probably not a great shock, but it was certainly a wake-up call, and so I took myself off to counselling. And
so how do you prepare? What do they say to you? They call you in, they say
your test results have come back and the doctor would like to see you. And
that's never a good sign when they say that.
No, because when I came back from India, I'd broken out in what looked like chickenpox. and somebody had suggested maybe doing an HIV test, and so I did. And so yeah, it was. But I was in the middle of, Raja Yoga and in a really good headspace, and I think I handled, the diagnosis at that time very well, although it was, earth shattering in a way. I remember feeling like my consciousness had shot to the moon and then come back and landed in my body. But I had some great support around me. I went to counselling, and then I also joined a support group run by Petria King, which happened at the Albion Street Clinic in Surrey Hills. And I went there every week, so it's lots of other men with HIV, and we'd all share our experience with one another, and then we'd meditate, have a break, and then come back and meditate for 40 minutes or an hour maybe. And it was just so amazing to be part of that. And then actually, forward wind some years, I ended up supporting at Petria King's Quest for Life Centre in Bundanoon. I'd fly down from Toowoomba and be a support person
Wow.
at her workshops. And I also brought her to Toowoomba for a day seminar around that time too. So I have a lot of respect for Petria and the work that she does. So if anyone out there is struggling with, a new diagnosis or even just, a traumatic life event where you may feel like you need help, I highly recommend the Quest for Life Centre. And of course, places like ACON, the AIDS Council of New South Wales, and, the Queensland AIDS Council, whatever. We're living in a different time with HIV now, of course, and I'm very fortunate to still be here. I've been on medications for 24 years. And many of the people that I knew back in the day, they've long gone. And I was doing massage back in the early 90s. I'd done a couple of different massage courses, and bought a massage table, and I was working at the Glebe Healing Centre one day a week doing massage, and then I also did some mobile massage. And so when I worked in the deli, there was the gay choir, Sydney Gay Choir, were rehearsing in the church there at the Paddington Market site, and they would come into the deli to buy some refreshments, mid-rehearsal. And so I got to know some boys, one of whom was Teddy, and Teddy had AIDS, and Teddy asked me if I would massage him from time to time, which I did. And Teddy ended up in, I think it was called Ward 17 at St Vincent's Hospital in Sydney. I think that was. And I remember walking in to see Teddy this particular day. I'd been massaging him at his home for a while, but now he was full-time in the AIDS ward. And I remember just walking in there one day and sitting on his bed. And I mean, I was healthy, feeling really good. And here was Teddy, wasting away and looking like, he was in a concentration camp, as were many other people, very young men. And I remember one man coming through the door of the ward, and he was a friend of Teddy's, and Teddy's bed was at the other end of the ward to where this fellow entered. And he just looked over at Teddy, and he was walking with a drip, the tripod thing, and just walking over toward Teddy, and he was so weak and so overwhelmed, and he just sat on the end of Teddy's bed, and he just said, what's happening? What's going on? And I'll never forget that moment, where he was just profoundly experiencing this thing called AIDS, which was just taking over the body, mind, and spirit of all these beautiful people. And then Teddy passed away. And I also had another friend who ended up with AIDS-related dementia, who I used to visit at the hospice. And he'd reverted back to being very childlike, because of the dementia. But yeah, very special and very sad moments. And so I've kind of come through that. And when I moved to Queensland in 94, I moved back to my hometown in Toowoomba, but I got in touch with the place called the Queensland Positive People in Brisbane. They had a centre at Allen Street at the time called the Allen Street Centre, and they had support groups there, and they had Friday night social dinners. And I remember offering to, co-facilitate or to facilitate a support group for people living with HIV and AIDS, because when I was in Sydney, I actually trained as an HIV/AIDS support group facilitator with people like Russell Westacott, wonderful man who's still very active in the community, and Peter Canavan. The AIDS Council were doing amazing work, and I imagine still are. And so I got involved in just giving a bit back, at the Allen Street Centre, and then started my new life in Toowoomba, where I've been now for the last 30 years.
Another full circle moment.
Yes.
End up back home. What was it like going back home? Well, first of all, when you were diagnosed, that was the early 90s. It kind of broke through. Was it the mid 80s?
Yes.
That it all came out. What was the prognosis or the information, or what did you know in early 90s about your condition?
Well, I mean, I knew that there
was it still early days of people understanding what was happening?
Pretty well. I mean, I know that in the mid-80s, when it became really obvious that Australia was now being affected by HIV/AIDS, many people were being diagnosed. There was only one drug available, which was very, very much still in the experiential kind of stages
And really expensive, wasn't it?
I think so, yeah. And I'm just trying to remember the name of the drug now. How terrible. I've just had a senior moment. But it was the only drug available for men and women to take at that time. And by the early 90s, I think there were other drugs. But you see, I didn't go onto any drugs until 2000. So I've been on drugs for 24 years now, and I've been through many combinations of drugs. So each combination of drugs potentially has a shelf life, and then one becomes resistant to that particular combination, and then you look for another combination. I remember at one stage my doctor hadn't told me, but he didn't think there was any more combinations that were going to work for me.
God.
And so he then put his head together with a specialist in the area, and they came up with my current combination, which I'm doing really well on. So, over the years, since the mid-80s, there are many more combinations of drugs now. And of course, as you alluded to earlier, it's such a different time now, because many people are going to live, kind of normal, in inverted commas, lifespan, However, for people like me who have been on medications for a long time, there are other side effects, that can happen as a result of the drugs. So, but, I'm healthy, I'm well, I'm content, I can laugh, I'm doing okay. And so I'm really grateful.
We're still here.
We're still here.
That's right. But you ended up going home to Toowoomba.
I did in the early 90s, 94-ish. I decided I wanted to reconnect with family because I'd lived away for nearly 15 years. And
back then it wasn't like today, where phone calls were expensive and there was no social media. So you were away from your family.
Yeah. I mean, I would travel home for Christmases, not every year, but often. But at that stage too, I didn't know how much life I had ahead of me. And mum and dad were getting older.
How was, given the world and everything we knew about HIV, how do you tell your family that conversation? I mean, how did you broach the subject with your parents?
Well, that makes me sad, to begin to respond to that question, because I told mum first, and I remember the way I told mum was in the middle of an argument with her. And it was almost like that's the only way I could do it. And I kind of yelled it at her. Anyway, I'm HIV. And she crumbled, moved over to the table and sat down and cried her eyes out. And she said, I knew it. And so I immediately got onto the phone to her best friend and asked her friend if she could come over and support Mum, and which she did. And I'll never forget what my mum's friend said. I mean, this lady I'd known since I was a little boy. She was part of the family, you know. And she said to me and to Mum, you know, she said, anyway, she said, come the time, we can just say that it was leukemia. It's like, of course, that's the answer to it. Yes, we'll just say it was leukemia. And that way, you know, there'll be no judgment. There'll be no, you know, whatever.
But seriously, isn't that like, don't you just love the way people think, and people think that, okay, we can just do this? And,
yeah.
But yeah.
I know. And, you know, it was coming from her.
Yeah, coming from the heart.
You know,
absolutely.
It's like nobody wants to get upset here, and we can just say it was leukemia, and, you know, don't have to go through any questions or, you know, people looking at you like you have 5 heads. So, yeah, so that's how I told Mum. And then I told Dad years later. But when I went on to medication, my mother was absolutely beaming with happiness when she saw me put on condition, because I'd lost a bit of weight, during which time I had my own children's entertainment group called the Freckles. So we were kind of like the Toowoomba version of the Wiggles in that we performed concerts for kids, and we travelled all over Queensland. We actually performed with the Wiggles at the Brisbane exhibition. So, yeah, I'd lost a bit of weight, but then the medication started and I just put on all this weight, and my condition improved, and I felt so much better and much more energised. And so, you know, that made Mum so happy. And unfortunately, she died in 2000, the very year I began medication. So at least she'd seen the medication affecting me positively within that year before she died. So it was really fast acting, actually, and just changed everything. And I've been doing really well ever since, even though I've, you know, had some resistance going on with different combinations. So if anybody's out there who's newly diagnosed with HIV or any potential life-threatening illness, you know, just remember that you're going to be okay, and to really get any help and support that you might need, and to do your best to not think that you've failed or that it's something to be ashamed of, you know, because this is life, and life happens sometimes in the least possible ways that we might expect it to, hey?
Oh, God, yeah, absolutely. Like I was saying to you before, I was doing medical role plays at Gosford and Wyong Hospital, and I actually asked about HIV and AIDS. How come you don't hear of it anymore? Like it used to be, you know, you're going to get it, you got to be careful, you know. Now you don't hear of it anymore. And so I said to the doctor, you know, how come? And he said, well, people don't die of AIDS anymore. We can manage it. We can handle it. Yeah, it was really interesting to hear, because I remember I lived through when it kind of arrived, I suppose, if it arrived. And, you know, it was a massive problem. You know, everybody was going to get it. This was going to kill the world. And I assume it's still out there, which obviously it is. But it doesn't seem to be a focus anymore.
No, and there's a thing called PrEP now, which apparently people can take, you know, when they're having sex with people whom they don't know the history of or whatever. And apparently it helps to prevent HIV diagnosis, which is amazing, you know. And I don't know if that can happen, you know, without using condoms or whatever, but I certainly would not recommend not using condoms and practicing safe sex. But yeah, there's a whole generation now of people that are on something called PrEP, which they can take, and it's going to prevent the virus from, you know, getting into their system. I'm really not sure how it all works, to be honest, but certainly wasn't around, you know, in my day. Yeah,
that's right. And you've been in Toowoomba since?
I have. I actually, as I said, I had my own children's entertainment company for over 10 years, which did really well. Also, during that time, I enrolled and trained as an emotional release counsellor. It was a course called Emotional Release Counselling and Transpersonal Studies. And it was just amazing how these doors opened for me. So I entered this 3.5 year counselling course as a way of working on my own issues. I did not enter the course to become a certified counsellor and to go out there helping people. Certainly I was open to that, but this course was experiential in the sense that all of us who were trainees were supporting each other throughout the course. And so, for example, if I was working on some voice dialogue as a client, I would be facilitated by another trainee and vice versa. So I trained in things like dream work, voice dialogue, sand play therapy, and also did a lot of holotropic breath work, a lot of deep breathing, kind of akin to rebirthing, where I went very deeply into my baggage of emotion that I never knew was there. So for the first time in my life, I got in touch with some very deep anger. And underneath all of my anger was so much sadness. And I remember when the sadness was coming up, it was around discrimination. It was around the way we hurt each other and ourselves. It was around my mother and my dad's wounds and how that played out. But one thing too that I really, really experienced during that time was what Carl Jung refers to as a collective unconscious. It's like we're all in this together. It's like my pain is your pain. My shame is your shame. It's like we're all experiencing the human experience at any given time. And we're all kind of experiencing pain, shame, self-doubt, fear, anger, whatever. It's part of the human experience. But it was such a gift to be able to not only know that I'm not alone in my being human, but that there is a way into releasing some of the stored feelings that had been kind of living in my body for a long time, unbeknownst to myself. When I was in Raja Yoga, I thought I'd found peace of mind and tranquility, and then it wasn't until I walked into the breathwork room at the Portiuncula Centre in Toowoomba that was run by a Catholic missionary sister who was doing her own inner work and had studied overseas and come back and opened this amazing centre. That I'm just so grateful for that experience and to have been able to feel some of those feelings. Counselling is great. I did a lot of counselling, cognitive kind of one-on-one, talking about my life, being validated, being heard, feeling safe. And then I entered into a whole different realm of inner work, which not everyone has to do, obviously, but I'm just so grateful that it's like my higher power. I'm not a religious person, but I really believe in a power greater than myself today. And, which I guess the 12-step program is what that's all about, getting out of my own way and being willing to be vulnerable enough to let go of all those things that I put in my body that stopped me from feeling, whether it's alcohol or sex or food or whatever distraction, whatever coping mechanism. It's like, one day at a time, I'd just be willing to let go and let God, which means the higher power of my understanding. And, I'm really involved in the 12-step fellowship today. I have sponsees that I work with, and I continue to, work on myself because, I'm never going to be perfect, thank God. So
I think anybody who thinks that they've made it or that they're, the best they can be, just should give it up then, because it doesn't happen. I don't care how old you are, there's always things to learn and, better ways to treat people.
Yeah, it's kind of a bit of a delusion, really, isn't it?
It is. It's sad.
Yeah.
Can I talk to you about something that's pretty special to both of us?
Sure.
Well, first of all, Prisoner. You worked on Prisoner. Were you one of those people that did, a couple of roles in Prisoner? Or?
Yeah. Actually, I did about 6 or 7 different episodes of Prisoner.
What, different characters?
Different characters.
Oh,
yeah.
wow.
So I felt it was so amazing to be, I think my first character had one line. He was trying to steal a bolt of material from a factory where the prisoners were on a day release thing. My sister, Nolene Burke, had pushed out a bolt of fabric that I was to pick up and steal, but was caught in the middle of the act and was having a tug of war with a character called Andrew Reynolds. And then I gave up and I said, have it, you pig. And that was my first prisoner line. And then I was called back to do other episodes. And the last episode I did, I got to act alongside Lois Ramsey. I played a punk rocker one day on the beach at South Melbourne, and with the aim of stealing her handbag that was full of money. So it was part of her storyline of wanting to go back to prison. She played a character called Etty. And of course, I'd grown up watching Lois Ramsey on the box and was a big fan. So I had like 2 scenes with her, and it was just so wonderful. I also had a scene with Gerda Nicholson, and I had a scene with Taya Stratton. But of course, you know, one scene that I had was with our dear friend, bless her heart, Maxine Cliven-Gaitis, which we filmed on Fitzroy Street in St Kilda, where me and my girlfriend, who were heroin addicts, met her on the street because Maxine's character Bobby had escaped from Wentworth.
Is that the time she accidentally escaped? She was telling me about how she accidentally escaped once.
I can't remember actually, because I don't know that I saw what happened before, but she definitely was outside the prison walls, and she ended up on Fitzroy Street. And I just lived around the corner at the time, and I remember that it was great. I just had to like go to work around the corner and do my bit. And anyway, Maxine had a scene with myself and this other actress, and I never forgot that. I just thought she was amazing. I remember, you know, doing the dialogue with her in the scene and just really hoping that one day I'd reconnect with her. And it was in recent years that I was involved in prisoner fan events. So I worked for Judge Enterprises and Events, which did 3 prisoner fans events where fans would pay money to come to somewhere to have a meal and to meet people like Maggie Kirkpatrick, Val Lehman, Maxine Cliven-Gaitis, so Amanda Muggleton, Paula Duncan, Linda Stoner. I mean, I got to meet again some of these amazing people and get paid to do it. It was just fantastic. And so Jackie Gordon, who I'd worked with on Dead Man's Float when we filmed at Lawn, had suggested to Darryl Judge, who is the manager of Judge
Enterprises.
Jackie put my name forward as compere, which I'd never really done before, so I was really nervous the first time. But anyway, as part of this, I got to reunite with Maxine, but had reunited with her through Jackie prior to meeting her again in person. So we would call each other 4 or 5 times a week and chat for like 2 or 3 hours. Mm-hmm. I'd never laughed so much in all my life. You know, Maxine was both frustrating and a joy to behold, you know. When I say frustrating, I'm sure I was equally as frustrating. We had a really real relationship. You know, we had our moments and we shared so much love. You know, Maxine was so loving to so many people, and I'm so pleased that you and I were 2 of them.
Well, you put me in contact with Maxine. Maxine had worked with a good friend of mine, Abigail, for a long time, and I know over the years how much Abby loved Maxine. So when you contacted me and said, you know, you got a friend, Maxine Cliven-Gaitis, who'd like to get in contact with her, I was more than happy, because I'd been looking for Maxine for quite a while to put them in contact with each other. And she was just a joy. She was just the most beautiful soul you could have in your life. And yeah, I really appreciate. Yeah, it's kind of sad that she's not here anymore.
Yeah, Clay. And you have a wonderful podcast where you interviewed Maxine.
Oh,
and it's just so amazing.
Well, it was really when she passed away in last year, 2023, that I decided that I didn't want a podcast anymore. And then I listened to her podcast and I thought it was so awesome. It was a really good point in time. It was just us riffing, just chatting, just talking about life. And that was what we did anyway, on the phone all the time. You know, we had about 5 years, I think, which really isn't much, but you know, she became a really good friend. And yeah, so thank you for putting us in contact. Yeah, she's sorely missed because she went so quickly. You know, we spoke to her the day before, and she had plans that she wanted to do. And you know, there's so many stories of prisoner and people and life, and yeah, she was just amazing. So how did you stay in contact with Maxine? So you started to work with Judge Enterprises.
Well, it was through Jackie Gordon because
yeah.
I got in touch with Jackie Gordon because we'd worked on Dead Man's Float. And then I tracked Jackie down on Facebook, I think it was. And Jackie and I got back in touch, and we were talking nearly every day there for over a year. And Jackie was doing another Prisoner Fans event, which wasn't with Judge Enterprises, and Maxine was going to be there on that particular day. And I said to Jack, you know, please give Maxine my love. She may not remember me, but please tell her that I've never forgotten her, and that I'd done that scene with her, and Maxine had remembered. And then before I knew it, she and I were chatting regularly on the phone, and all thanks to Jackie putting us in touch. So yeah, and we met in Sydney on several occasions for the events. And then I went to Melbourne. I did a road trip to Melbourne in 2019 and went to her place and hung out with her, and we went out for dinner with a mutual friend, went to Topolino's actually, which was right near where we did our prisoner scene all those years earlier. And yeah, so I'm just so grateful to have had her. She was such a talented actor, yeah?
Oh, absolutely.
So talented.
Absolutely.
And loved Abby.
Yeah.
Like, you know, yeah. So wasn't that so special that they got to?
Oh, look, I'm so happy. Abby's very private, as you know, and she doesn't trust many people, but she'd always spoken highly of Maxine, and I know how close they were. So yeah, it was good. It was awesome, you know, putting them on the phone to each other and just listening to them both giggle till they couldn't breathe. It was, they're crazy. Both of them were crazy, but it was so awesome just to see, you know, just no pressure, no agendas, that they just loved each other. So yeah.
Such a lovely gift for them both, huh?
Oh, it really is, because the connection that you make in this industry, it's such a fast-changing, lonely industry. There's only, you know, a few people that you find who are genuine.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm lucky I found a few over the years.
So great to have met you, Clay.
You too. I didn't want to podcast anymore after Maxine passed away. And then when I saw that you were on the coast a couple of days ago, I just said to Amanda, this is perfect. I need to have Rick on. I really, really hope he does the podcast. And I'm so glad that you did.
Oh, it's my pleasure. You know, it's a real honor. You know, I thought, oh, gee, me. But, you know, your podcast is about people and their stories, isn't it? So I feel like, yeah, I have a right to be here.
Oh, absolutely you do. We've all got a story to tell, and that's why I started.
Yeah.
You know, we've got so many amazing people with big hearts, and they're the ones that I want to talk to.
And I'm really grateful. Yeah.
Thank you so much for chatting today. I'm sure we'll chat again.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Yarn About You is a Centre Stage creative production. Follow us on Facebook by searching Yarn About You, or visit yarnaboutyou.com.au for more information about the podcast and our guests.